Welcome to the All Together Show with Eric Satz. On this show, you'll hear Eric's unfiltered interviews with interesting and untraditional entrepreneurs who ignored boundaries, followed their instincts, and owned paths, and are now empowering others to do the same. Subscribe to the show and learn more by visiting alltogether.show. And now, your host, Eric Satz.
Talk about a roller coaster. This week's guest, Matt Mireles, has a story that takes you one. If it was a real-life roller coaster, it would absolutely have an age and height requirement. There are ups and downs, lots of dark days, followed by lots of light. Matt's path exemplifies the grit and belief in self needed to succeed as an entrepreneur. He's an incredibly unique individual, and he's not afraid to share his experiences with you. So I hope you enjoy this show as much as I enjoyed recording it.
This episode of the All Together Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto is a digital, self-directed IRA company modernizing IRA investing. They make it easy and cost-effective for individual investors to access their retirement savings and invest in alternative assets. To learn more, visit altoira.com.
Matt Mireles, really great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Cool idea.
Excellent. So you, by the way, are the first guest that I cold emailed. Or I guess I cold tweeted at you, having read one of your threads and was just really intrigued. And for all the guests, Matt is a serial entrepreneur. He has co-founded a number of companies. He's co-founding are you co-founding or founding the Oasis now?
I'm the co-founder CEO of the Oasis,
Okay. So, but serial entrepreneur, investor, advisor. He's also the first paramedic to be on the show, and he supported himself through Columbia University as a paramedic. So first time we've had that happen. I could sort of go through the bio and name of companies, and maybe we'll talk about some of them later. But really, if you're out on a first date or you're interviewing someone or someone's interviewing you and they say, "Who's Matt Mireles?" What do you say?
I believe in pursuing your dreams. And, most of what I've done in my life, I've been completely unqualified to do. And, I go for stuff, I paid my way through college as a paramedic in the South Bronx in Harlem. I was going to be a journalist. I worked at the New York Times and Newsweek. I was a peon, and then I saw the internet eating that whole media world in the late 2000s. And I said, I want to get on the other side of that revolution. And in 2008, I started my first internet company. I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I didn't have any tech background. I didn't have any business background. I never had a white collar job. For the first 2 years, I was still working as a paramedic mostly in the Bronx and Harlem. And people kind of laughed at me, in medical world when I told them I was kind of like, I was working on this internet startup. And, like, oh yeah, sure you are, kid. Oh, that isn't that cute. And I was always an outsider, and I had a really big chip on my shoulder. And, it's been over a decade now. I started my first company in 2008. We raised some venture capital, sold it in 2012, which sounds better than it was actually. I had another startup that failed miserably. I went like $100,000 in credit card debt. I was depressed, etc. Couldn't get a job. That sucked. And then in 2015, I started a company called Dishcraft Robotics, making dishwashing robots for restaurants. That ended up being a bit of a rocket ship. I left, ended up leaving the company after a bit. Worked at Amazon for a hot minute at AWS. I started angel investing in 2017, and last year I started Oasis with my co-founder Yusuf, and we're a synthetic communication company, which we're a new category, but a new kind of AI mediated or AI based form of video communication. They use about 100x less bandwidth than traditional video calling, but requires about 10x more compute. It's a whole crazy idea. When it comes out, you'll see.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to that. But let's go back to the beginning. So you're born in California. Where in California are you born?
I grew up in the suburban wastelands of Los Angeles.
What is that? What does that mean? What are the suburban wastelands?
Well, I don't know. It's from a Bad Religion song. I grew up in Whittier. It's like a boring suburb, like on the border of Orange County in LA. I don't know. You take for granted where you grew up, and I just was never. I always wanted to get out of there. I had bigger dreams than the nice, middle class existence that my dad had kind of, clawed his way into for the family. And I had bigger dreams, and I wanted to go adventure and excitement. And so for me, it was always just this place that I was itching to leave.
How many siblings?
3. I'm the youngest. I was an accident. I was a strong swimmer. My parents had their 3 kids and a dog in the 60s. And then in 1980, my mom was 41. My dad was 52. And I showed up. So I was kind of like a novelty child, my parents were sort of checked out. They're good parents, but they'd done their thing. They weren't helicoptery or anything. Well, just don't kill yourself, kid. And so my siblings, who were 12 to 15 years older than me, often played a bit of a quasi-parental role. My parents were half parents, half kind of grandparents. I don't know. It was my life. I don't have any other frame of reference, but I think is not the standard, for them or for, I think, most people.
How old were you when you knew you wanted to get out? And is it get out, or does the word escape come to mind?
So I have an unusual family.
Tell us.
Just give you a sense of the influences that I grew up with. So my dad, he was born in dirt poverty in New Mexico. He was the eldest son. His father died. He was born in 1929. Okay. His father died before he was born. He's very dark skinned. He's a third Apache. And, in that society is it was a 2-tiered society. He calls them the Tejanos, the white people, and the Hispanos. And he felt depressed, and he wanted to get the fuck out of town. By the time he was a teenager, I think he'd almost shot somebody, and he was like, if I stay here, I'm gonna kill somebody. And so he moved to East LA. Was a quinceanera crasher in his teenage years. So if you've seen the movie Wedding Crashers,
I have.
Quinceanera is the Mexican Sweet 16 party, and so he would cruise around East LA, crashing quinceaneras in high school. Then he went to the military. I don't know, understand how he did this, but talked his way into not having to wear a uniform. And he wrote for a general, had a top secret clearance. Then graduated, worked pipeline construction, to East LA Community College and UCLA. Then grad school at UCLA, got a PhD. He was one of 2 brown people in his entire graduating class. It was pre-affirmative action or anything. And then he was a Chicano rights activist and had some kind of radical schemes that he was working on through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, helping people, teaching people to learn how to read and on all these other things. That was my dad. My oldest brother was a professional rock climber. He was one of the top rock climbers in the country, and also an ice climber, climbing from frozen waterfalls. My other brother dropped out of college to mountain bike over the Andes and through the Amazon. And so I grew up with my brother Kevin telling me these stories about the time that drunken truckers tried to kidnap him and his partner when their visa had expired, so they were like getting smuggled across Lake Titicaca, which is like the lake connecting, I think, Bolivia and Peru or something like that. And the other guys had like a machete, and so it was like a knife fight where only one guy has a knife. And then going through the Amazon jungle and running out of food, and discovering that it's panther mating season, and people being shocked that they don't have guns and getting attacked by killer bees. And these are just the kind of stories that like I grew up on, and so the idea that I would do kind of crazy things was not like, it might seem like, oh, you fought forest fires in Montana, you drove an ambulance in the South Bronx or in South Central LA. That might seem unusual, but for me, like, that was just pretty standard in sort of like the, what we did in our family, So, yeah, it was, everyone has a baseline that, whatever you're exposed to is normal, right? Like, no one has knowledge outside of your experience, outside of your own experience, except through books and literature and media. And that was my normal growing up. That's how my, my family and my parents and everyone did things. And so, yeah, it was, and so to compare that to this boring suburb that I was living in, I grew up, I wanted to be like some combination of like Jack Kerouac, Ernest Hemingway, Jack London, have all this adventure and excitement. And being in like suburban LA, it wasn't like oppressive or anything. It was just boring. Like, I wanted bigger things in my life.
You needed a car, a road, a boat, and an ocean all at the same time.
Yeah, there's this movie, you've probably seen, what was it called? Dead Poet Society.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Robin Williams talks about, sucking from the pith of life. And I wanted that, and I felt like I was in this boring suburbs. Everyone around me in my immediate family, had all these big, crazy life experiences, and here was I. And so I wanted some of that. I wanted a different experience, and I wanted to have the kind of life, that the people around me, had, and the kind of stories. And I felt, a bit of a inferiority complex, but also, my mom's bipolar, and that's been pretty crippling for her in her life. And parents like a weird couple. Like, my dad's this like very self-made, hardcore, like uh Latino, strongman type, but softy. And my mom's just like, comes from like a relatively wealthy family in Argentina, and had a very comfortable upbringing. And like, I was always afraid. I saw how she struggled just to get up in the morning, and I knew that bipolar disorder, or manic depression, as it was called at the time, was something that was heritable. And the science around it was a little bit like, it was a little unclear, but there was some genetic component. And so I was always afraid that I would end up like her, and that, for her, she's like uber Catholic, and like the Lord is responsible for everything, everything good. And I was always afraid that I would end up sort of crippled like her, and, being, struggling to get out of bed, and like whenever there'd be stress, just sort of like wilting, because I was a kid. I didn't have any broader context. All I knew was like bipolar equals mom, and I was afraid of that. So I also had this like fear and this chip on my shoulder that I needed to like prove myself, that I could be something else, that I could be different, that I wasn't going to end up, like her. It was a real fear I had in my teen years and 20s. And as an adult now, I see things differently. I see her differently. I see my parents' relationship differently. But that was one of the things that at the time really was driving me, Yeah.
So you mentioned two brothers. Who is your third sibling?
That's my sister. Um, so yeah, she's a very creative person, and she was also one of the top rock climbers in the country for a bit. Um, you know, yeah, she's a she's an awesome person.
Excellent. So, were you close to your dad?
Oh yeah, I'm super close to my dad. He's 90 now, but yeah, he's still alive and kicking.
Because it comes out. I can see it in your eyes. I can see it in your eyes as you talk about all of them. By the way, I mean, it feels like that despite the fact that you wanted to get out of Dodge, there was an unbelievable level of respect that I can feel and hear in your description of your family life. And so it's really
Well,
interesting. Go ahead. Yeah.
actually, here. This right here is the old man. Uh, this is from back in the day, but
Oh man, I love it.
yeah, this is a poster from
You could
his
step
heyday.
in, by the way. If we just colored your beard just a little bit and maybe extended your mustache a little, I feel like you're right there.
Yeah, well, he's got you know, we just learned out that he's like a third Apache, and so I think I'm hairier than him. I think definitely he's had the mustache. He does the mustache way better than
Does he do
I've ever been
wax?
able to
Does he
do.
do mustache wax?
Once upon a time, now not so much. But when I was growing up, yeah, like he would full on wax the mustache. It's pretty epic.
By the way, so this is the second story in as many weeks as I've heard of, like someone born in New Mexico. Demi Moore actually was born and initially grew up in New Mexico. Her story actually is quite heartbreaking and a tremendous amount of moving around the country. But if anyone out there is listening and wants an interesting audiobook as well, the Demi Moore audio, her autobiography is really interesting. Completely unexpected, by the way. So you want to get out of town. Where is the first destination outside of California? Where do you go next?
Well, so uh, the real story is that I went to Berkeley after out of high school, and I had these big dreams. But the summer before Berkeley, I took a like a 9 or 12 week training program, like to be an EMT, an emergency medical technician, and um, and the reason I'd taken it is because the summer before I'd had a job and I hated it. And my father was like, look, either you're going to work or you're going to be in school, but you're not going to lounge around. So I said, okay, I hate working, so I'm going to like take this class. Um, and it was just like it was really an excuse just to not have to like actually get a real job. Um, but as part of this class, there was a internship once a week where you work in an ER as a student. Um, and like I was a cocky honors, student in high school, whatever. And I thought the most important thing in life at the time was like your SAT score, your GPA, and what college you went to. And then I go to this emergency room, and it's real life. You know, I do CPR on somebody for the first time, and then the doctor pronounces death, and the family grieves. There was a trans person with AIDS that the nurses didn't want to touch, and the person was like, so distraught and all these things. And it really punctured my bubble and blew my mind. It was an education that like I'd never had. I'd never, it really blew my mind. So then I went to Berkeley after that for a semester, and I was like, okay, this is boring. Like, the classes weren't that interesting or challenging. And compared to this insanely intense and real and meaningful experience that I'd had, I was I was like, what am I doing here? This is pointless. Like I don't want to be here. So I dropped out after a semester, and I got a job driving a 911 ambulance in South Los Angeles, LA County, South Central and surrounding kind of areas. And I'd always wanted to be like a writer type, and was very empathic, and I didn't have good boundaries at the time. And I will say, if you want to cruise for an emotional bruising, go be a 911 ambulance in the ghetto, and not have good sense of personal boundaries. And I had these crazy experiences.
Can you share one?
Yeah, there was this one morning. I was working a triple shift, so I'd work like a 9-hour shift during the day, a 12-hour shift overnight, and then another 9-hour shift back to back. Because they had this like crazy pay scale where the longer the shift you worked, the less you made per hour. So it was like a way to bypass California like daily overtime laws. And on the overnight, it was kind of slow. And then in the morning, we got called to a cardiac arrest. And it was my first one that like not at where I wasn't as a student. And it was this like kind of old guy with cancer. In retrospect, it was like, yeah, whatever. But at the time I was very, I took it really seriously, and I think, I'd screwed up in some way. Like there's like, you put a seal, like it's called the bag valve mask, you put a seal, and I was so nervous that I had it upside down. So instead of like blowing air into the guy's lungs, I was blowing it on his face. And they drill into you in training, like the brain dies without oxygen after 4 minutes, and I realized this about halfway to the hospital. And actually the paramedic's like, hey, by the way, dude, like, gotta, might be different. I was like, oh, and I fixed it. And then we took him to the hospital, this hospital called Martin Luther King Hospital in Compton. The nickname was the Killer King. It's since been shut down. It deserved its nickname, by the way. And they pronounced death. And I felt guilty. And then as I was walking out to the ambulance, another crew showed up with I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 8-month-old in cardiac arrest. And I went to help them, and I started, and I was doing chest compressions on this little baby, where I could wrap my hands around the chest, and you push with the thumbs. And as I was doing this, the mom showed up, and she was screaming in my ear. And there are certain things you'll never forget in life, but a mother talking to her dead child, her lifeless child, and saying, begging her, pleading her to live, pleading with her not to die, begging her, talking to her. And there's certain things that I've seen a lot of, and I've seen a lot of that kind of thing. And it's that shit will haunt your soul. It will haunt your fucking soul. And then they pronounced the little baby dead, after trying to work on for an hour. And then I left, and I was pretty frazzled, you know. And I went and we got like McDonald's just to eat, and we're in line. I was about to order, and then I got another. And then we got a call. We got a call right before I was about to order. I was like, "Fuck! Please just don't be a dead person. Please just don't be a dead person. Please don't be a dead person." It's like, okay, difficulty breathing. 40-year-old female, difficulty breathing. Go there. This woman, Hispanic woman, speaks Spanish only. You know, and she's having trouble breathing. We go. The paramedics think she's, you know, maybe asthma. They treat her for asthma. It's not doing anything. And you know, and I say this because both myself and the paramedic were both Latino, which is going to play an important role. And so I was a noob. The paramedics are the guys in charge. The EMT are kind of the helper. And so the thing that was odd is that her heart rate was through the roof, but you know, but other than that, like her lungs sounded fine. So they treated her and they got to the hospital, and I'm like, oh, what do you think it is? The paramedic, and it's like, I think it's HP, dude. And HP in that world is short for Hispanic panic. And so we go to the ER, and he gives a report to the doctor. He's like, yeah, I thought it was asthma, but I think it's just, you know, HP. You know, and so the doctor turns around and says, okay, Maria. And I'm like writing my report. Okay, Maria, what's wrong? Did your boyfriend break up with you today? And well, Maria is sitting on the gurney, and she sits up, and you can see she's on like the EKG. You can see, you know, opens her mouth and then collapses. And you see her heart rate go 140, 80, 30, 0, asystole, flatline. And then the doctor just loses her shit. And it's like the most chaotic, worst run cardiac arrest you could imagine. She like grabs the crash cart, starts screaming, opens the medication drawer, medications spill out everywhere on the floor. You know, they start dropping shit. She's flipping out. You know, I'm trying to do CPR. It's just a giant cluster. The doctor is like, now I think feels very guilty, right? Like, oh shit, because she took her oxygen mask off. I think what she had going was actually a pulmonary embolism, which means like air was going through her lungs, but there was no gas exchange because there's a clot in the circulatory system. And I remember, and this was like the end of my second shift in a 3, and I'd gone from having never experienced that to having just like 3 in a row, and I was just wrecked emotionally, and I had to take I had to call off my next shift, and I had nightmares about it, and I was like replaying the tape again and again. The woman in the ER, the mother screaming, you know, all that stuff. And it was an education, both in the world, you know, and also in myself, and how I responded to trauma, which was not good at the time. I became like hard and kind of a dick to like protect myself. But I learned a lot about the world and a lot about myself, these experiences. And it was very difficult at the time. And you know, I think I ended up sort of with my first experience with depression sort of as a result of that. But it was a very important lesson, and it was an incredible experience. And I think a key part of my education. And I learned so much from these things that, I don't know, they're not considered education in the traditional sense, but definitely shaped how I see the world, and how I think about everything that I do now.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, clearly it's not, clearly it's still not very far from the surface, right? It feels like the way you told that story felt like it happened yesterday. I mean, so I can understand how it just stays with you. So how you're in you're in East LA, South LA, and how do you get to New York? Where does Columbia come into play? Why do you go back to school? I mean, you're having, it's not traditional education, but man.
Yeah, so I ended up getting fired from my ambulance job. I mean, this is long. Like we could talk for a long time, but basically, I stuck up for a patient that was adverse, where sticking up to the patient was adverse to the financial interests of the company, and pissed off like the man, the supervisor, like the boss,
Right.
and then I'm getting fired. So 6 months later, I went back to Berkeley, and I, you know, I wanted to be a writer, and and a journalist, um, and I also started fighting forest fires in the summers, first in Montana, and then elsewhere. And I did that for 2 more years, and I wasn't, I just wasn't motivated. I didn't care, I didn't see the point. Um, and so I dropped out again to actually try to write a book about my experiences as an EMT. Um, and then I learned a very important financial lesson, which is um, I needed to work about 70 to 80 hours to be able to afford to live independently because the pay was such dog shit. Um, if I worked a 24-hour shift, I was getting $6.75 an hour, like minimum wage, but I would do that so I could get into overtime, and then like sort of like financially engineer this stuff. Um, and there was no time to write a book. And, my friends are graduating, and I'd gone from like, oh, Matt's doing cool stuff to like, now I'm like kind of stuck in this like blue collar job. And it's, I had this partner who would be like this chain smoker guy who would like, I think it was Phil. He kind of balding, pot belly. He dropped out of UCLA. He's like, oh yeah, you going back to school, huh? Yeah, that's what I said too, huh? And I was like, okay. And then like some crackhead would show up and be like, suck your dick for a cheeseburger, and we'd be like, and I was like, okay, I this is not how I want to live my life. And so I was really terrified that I'd end up sort of stuck in blue collar land. But I needed a way to finance school. And so sort of the next step in sort of being an EMT is to become a paramedic. So I said, okay, I'll go to school to become a paramedic, and then I'll use that to pay for college. And so it took a year. I actually failed out my first try at paramedic school because I didn't take it seriously enough. And I went back, graduated top of my class, and then did one last summer fighting forest fires on what's called the hot shot crew. Traveled all over the country, Alaska, Washington, all over big crazy fires. And then that summer, I applied to this program at Columbia that was like for non-traditional students. So there were like a lot of like ballerinas, like Navy SEALs, like bond traders, like etc. And I got in, and I was really excited, and I moved to New York City, and I got a job as a paramedic. It was cool because in New York, I could get what's called a per diem job. So I actually was able to pick my own hours. And with two jobs, so I was able to sort of like flexibly work from anywhere from 100 hours a week to zero, and that allowed me to pay for school. But it was a real financial challenge because what I didn't know about the program is that while the education is the same, the financial aid was not. And so, it turned like the average graduating debt load of people there was like on average about 100 grand if you took on student debt, which is insane, the highest of any university in the country. And I was deathly afraid of that. And so, at one point I was in school, and I hurt my ankle. I was out of work for 6 months. And so I went to class full time. And the way I had to finance that is I had a 0% APR and an Amex card that lasted 12 months. And I maxed it out for 10 grand. And I promised myself that I wouldn't pay any interest on it. And so, after 6 months, I was able to work on the ambulance again. I got surgery on my ankle. And I ended up working like 50 hours a week on the ambulance while in school, taking about a half-time course load. And I paid it off. But it was a real, real challenge. And it was burning me out. And I'd always had this dream of being a writer and, being a journalist. And, when I was unemployed, I couldn't do anything else. So I started writing for the school paper. And I'd written this article that was like a profile of an Iraq vet who was now on campus and was like bragging about the 500 plus confirmed kills that his unit had, which was very out of the ordinary at the time. And so after the semester of working 50 hours a week, I was totally burnt out. And then I got my financial aid award notice, and it was like, you've received $0 for financial aid. And my dad had been like, son, I love you, but like, you're an idiot. What are you doing? Like, Columbia's a rich kid school. You're not a rich kid. I'm sorry. Like, I wish things were different. But like, you're not a rich kid. Like, I don't support, like, this is a bad idea. Like, I know it's New York, girls, whatever, but like, I don't support the decision. And so I was really on my own financially, and it just felt undoable. And so I was literally walking to the registrar's office to withdraw when I get a phone call from this old dude. This is Matt Mireles. Yeah, who's this? Marty Singerman, the News America Foundation. I'm like, yeah, what can I do for you? Why don't you know that you've been awarded the Eric Brindell Prize, for college journalism? I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I just made my last payment on the 10 grand. The award comes with a $10,000 cash prize. And the award ceremony will be, chaired by Michael Bloomberg, the mayor. And then like Rupert Murdoch and like these crazy like neoconservative News Corp people, and like, oh, we'll fly your parents out, for it and put them up in a hotel. And I was like, what? And it was just like it was life changing. And then suddenly I got on the school's radar, and they're like, oh, maybe we should actually give money to this kid. And suddenly my financial aid award sort of changed and improved. And
did you know you were a candidate for this award?
Yeah, I did, but it was like such a long shot that I never thought it was like $10,000. Come on, I'm just a guy. It's like the fifth article I've written for the school,
Right.
the school paper. Like I knew it was good, but I didn't think that much of it. So yeah, that was life changing. My dad suddenly thought Columbia was a bad idea. Administrators started to like me. I was able to go to school full time, which I could qualify for actual scholarships. I didn't have to work 50 hours a week. I could work like 16 to 32 hours a week, which was way more doable. I could go to school full time, and it was really life changing. And I ended up freelancing for the New York Times and Newsweek, and I was kind of a young hotshot in that world. And this was like 2006 to 2008. And I had all these ideas for software products and ways to use software to tell stories better on the internet. But I didn't know anything about startups or, I had these ideas. I had this instinct, and I would try to pitch it to these people, and they'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't get it. And I remember I had this pivotal meeting with one of the managing editors of Newsweek, a very wonderful woman named Kathy Devney. And I pitched her on this idea that she became my first startup. And she said, Matt, Matt, okay. Look, don't worry about this internet thing. Okay. There's a guy named Dave. He runs the whole internet. He works in the basement and he deals with the internet. You don't need to worry about the internet. Don't worry about the internet. No one is internet stuff. Write articles, take pictures. You're great at it. This internet, don't, no. And I walked out of that meeting and be like, wow, these people are dinosaurs. I need to get on the other side of this revolution. And so, and I was at Columbia when Facebook showed up on campus, and I remember seeing that and being like, oh, this is going to change the world. This is obviously transformative. And it was like this 20-year-old dude running it. And like, I was trying to get the attention of a bunch of like old school media people. And they were like, you're a junior. We don't care what you say. And I was like, I want to be like that guy. And, but I had no idea what I was doing. And I saw the news business had a business model problem. And I didn't know anything about business. I knew enough to know that. And so I heard about this program at Stanford, the Stanford Graduate School of Business. There was like a mini MBA for idiots. And it was like a 6-week crash course. And I went and got like some scholarship. And I got to Silicon Valley and fell in love. And there was these crazy people who were creative with adventure and excitement. And some of them actually got rich. I was going to go to be a war reporter in Afghanistan. And then I found out how much money they made. It was like, I'd make less money doing that than what I was doing to pay for college. Like, this is upside, and there's no growth prospects whatsoever. So after that, the financial crisis happened. It was like very clear. An offer to join the New York Times in a very junior position, and they were on the verge of bankruptcy, or I could take these ideas and bet on myself. And because I'd worked my way through school, I didn't have the internships and all these other things. So you have to get like an unpaid internship that was like lead to like a shitty internship that would lead to like a really good paid internship. And I couldn't afford like steps 1 through, the first 2 steps in that process. And so I couldn't even get interviews at like banks or everything that like would pay real money that other people were getting. And so I said, okay, no one is going to hire me for a job that I believe I'm worthy of. And so I will bet on myself because I believe in myself. And that started my career as an entrepreneur.
So what was company number one? What's company number one?
Well, there's what it started and what it became. It was called Speaker Text. It became a hybrid speech recognition, crowdsourced video to text video transcription service. What I wanted it to be was a way of sharing, like creating transcripts for video and using video online and making it readable and searchable. And then you could share like quotes from the transcript and like deep link back to those moments. And then I wanted to create a better way to tell stories on the internet. We raised $1 million or so from Google Ventures and others. I was able to put a team together. It took a while. I had no idea what I was doing, but we were all super green. And I never worked an office job. I was a dog shit manager, I wildly uncontrolled, untreated ADHD, tons of mistakes. We sold the company in 2012 for 13 cents on the dollar. But it looks good on LinkedIn. Yeah.
And if it looks good on LinkedIn, then who cares, right?
Well, at the time, I didn't want to go home with a zero.
Right.
That was my...
No.
Yeah, that was...
Yeah, and you shouldn't. Somebody else can do something else with it, then that's okay too.
Yeah.
So what do you take from the first entrepreneurial experience? Where does it lead you? I mean, starting things is hard. And then not succeeding, and I can tell sort of the way you described it, you don't consider it a win. So what do you do with that? How do you feel? What's next?
Yeah, I think like a lot of I think your first startup is like your first love. And, the highs are never higher, the lows are never lower. because again, this sense of boundaries, it's like your first love, right? You have no boundaries. That was for me. Like you have no sense of boundaries, and you're just all in, and your identity is enmeshed. And I think with my first startup, I was the speaker text guy. Like I had a huge chip on my shoulder. Like at Columbia, I was treated like a fucking second class citizen. I had shit financial aid. I had to work. I dated this woman who was amazing, but she got internships through a high school alumni network. And I would be coming home from work on the train and see girls in my classes, but in my uniform, and I try to like talk to them, I'd be like, oh my God, who's that like security guard there that's like looking at me like, oh my God, and so I had this huge chip on my shoulder, and like I had a mohawk at the time, and I was like, fuck you to the world. I wasn't like, I had a huge chip on my shoulder and a lot of attitude and a lot of hubris. And my sense of self, my identity was totally wrapped up in my startup. And so, at that, like, it also coincided with having my son, like my son was, like a lot of things happened at the same time. And I was devastated. My confidence was wrecked. I lost a lot of faith in myself. I was not in a good place. I was not in a good place. And it took me about 3 years to recover from that.
When do you rack up? So you clearly you are fiscally aware because you've paid off a $10,000 credit card with which you had no associated interest, right? But now you've gone through speaker text. It doesn't work in the end, even though you can flip it. At what point are you racking up $100,000 in credit card bills? Because this is the thread that I saw on Twitter, and I was like, okay, this guy knows what the real entrepreneurial experience is.
Yeah, so I took 2 weeks off and started my second company because I had this like burning need to prove myself. I had people who doubted me, and I felt like a failure, and I wasn't going to let that stand. And so I started working on the company. I think I made like 35 grand out of the sale or something like that. Which, I mean, I was paying myself 60 grand. No, it was 30 grand. So it was like a half year's of salary, which was like, hey, a lot of money. But I was living in San Francisco, which is getting way more expensive. I have a kid, life's expensive. And I'd felt burned by my investors. They'd given us some very bad advice. Our sort of lead investor, who's sort of this famous dude, had told us to like ramp up our burn and to turn down money from another venture capitalist, and saying he was going to co-lead our Series A, and partner from Sequoia Capital was showing up at our office. And I was like, we got this in the bag. And then that all evaporated. And had we taken the more money and not spent so much, we could have had room for a pivot and to try something else. But we were just kind of fucked at the time. And so we had to sell the company. And I saw I'd gone from being this sort of like swashbuckling outsider who sort of defined myself as an outsider to suddenly like being inside and like not knowing what to do. It's like the dog who catches the bumper, like what do you do now? And so I didn't want to raise money until I found product market fit, because I saw how it distorted my thinking, and I started making bad decisions, and I kind of bought into this hype cycle that I'd been good at creating. And so I had a couple friends who offered money early, and I didn't take their money. I was like, I'm going to just do a couple experiments, then I'll raise money in a month or two. The experiments didn't work. I started burning through my cash. And then I was like, well, I'll just put a little bit on a credit card and I'll raise money and pay it off with credit card. Another month goes by. more bills, more this, more that. A year and a half goes by, and I'm almost totally maxed out on. I'm getting close because I had a really big credit cushion because I'd like, okay, I'm gonna like max get like crazy credit limits. I never missed a bill. And then I went out and so we sold the company in August 2012. 2 weeks later, I started my new company, and being like a grocery delivery company called Easy Fridge. It was like a weekly delivery thing. And I went and finally decided I just needed to raise money by early 2014. But I went like a year and a half bootstrapping. And I'd racked up just shy of $100,000. And I went out and I got one of my mentors, this guy, Mark Randolph, who was the original CEO, founder of Netflix. He wrote me a small angel check. And I was excited for a minute. And by this point, I was depressed. I started drinking, like I worked at a WeWork where there was free beer, not a lot, but like, a few beers in the afternoon, started around 2 and gained a lot of weight. And when the money hit the wire hit the bank account, I was excited and for a minute. And then I thought about it and I just felt this existential dread because I didn't want to do it anymore. It wasn't fun anymore. It was like a roller coaster ride that I didn't want to be on. It wasn't fun. And the idea of like committing, because when I raise capital, I take it very seriously. It's a commitment to build the company and turn that.
It really is.
You can never promise success, but you have to believe that that's possible. And the idea of committing to more years of this, I didn't. It filled me with dread. And so I called Mark up 2 days later, and I was in tears. And I said, Mark, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I can't take your money in good faith. And so I sent him back the money, 100 cents on the dollar. And then at that point, I think I came home and I laid off the team, and then I fell into bed and I just couldn't get up. Did that for a couple of days. My son was 2 years old. His mom, who I was living with, like finding like cats and dogs. She's stressed out. San Francisco's crazy expensive. We're living in like a 1-bedroom apartment with a 2-month-old. She's commuting to the South Bay. Rent's like $3,200. I can't. I'm like now driving for Lyft to like make my credit minimum payments and just to make the minimums. Like the idea of getting out felt impossible. And I tried to get a job in VC. A guy I knew from New York, this guy Chris Dixon, he just joined Andreessen Horowitz, and it's like, oh hey, we're having to open the deal team, and I went to like 9 rounds of interviews there, and then didn't get the job. I don't know, it wasn't a job I wanted actually, as much as weird as that sounds. And my friends were running startups, and like I was like, hey, product manager job. And I couldn't even get interviews. Everyone I was like, oh, Matt, you're interesting or colorful, but you don't fit the description. And I was depressed, man. I was depressed. And so a year later, I've been struggling, and there's this feeling they describe when people are drowning, where at first you start drowning and you have this air hunger and this panic sets in. But then at some point the panic stops and you feel an incredible sense of calm. People talk about going to the light. And in those last moments before you die, you feel this sense of calm. and then you die. And at one point I capitulated and I said, I can't do this. And so I decided I was going to declare bankruptcy. And I had a plan. I was going to do a cash advance because I still had some balance left on my credit card, and I never missed a payment. So I was going to do a cash advance to pay off my student loans so they would be fungible in bankruptcy. On the same day, I was going to sign up for Hack Reactor, which was a coding boot camp, pay for that upfront in one slug. And then once all those transactions cleared, I was going to declare bankruptcy. I was going to balloon my debt and then discharge it all and then go to Hack Reactor and then get a job as a software engineer. And I called my dad again and I was in tears and I said, Dad, I failed. I failed as an entrepreneur. I failed. I tried, but I fucking failed. I said, okay, son, I love you. You know, you're up there, you know, with trying to make it big, you know, like I always, you know, like I always thought it was hard, what you're trying to do, but you know, you have these dreams. And that was like the culmination of the panic. And then after that, I just felt free. Like I was free. I didn't have to worry anymore. But then 2 days later, I get a text message from this woman that I'd met who'd been interviewing for the same job at Andreessen. And I said, hey, you know, this idea you had, because she'd want to start a robotics company. She'd started another one before called Nita Robotics. And I pitched her on the idea of dishwashing robots for restaurants. She's like, hey, no, it's an awesome idea. Let's do the startup. And I'm like, oh, negative. I am done. I'm out of the game. No way, not going to fucking happen. And she's like pestering me. I'm like, okay, look, I got a garage here. I come over, we can whiteboard it out. You want to make me an advisor? Whatever. I'm done. I'm out of the game. She comes over, we do the math. Her name's Linda. And we do the math. And the math looks better than any math I'd ever seen on any idea I'd ever come up with. It's like, I told you, let's do the startup. She wanted me to be the CEO. I was like, oh, no, CEO, no fucking way. I was like, well, it would be better than declaring bankruptcy. And worst case, you know, maybe I'll just declare bankruptcy a few months later. And talked to a couple investors, end up with a term sheet in like a few days, which was just crazy. I'd never had an experience like that before. And we're funded and rock and rolling. And 2 years later, the company was valued at $100 million by investors. And I was, Lynn and I, it was a shotgun marriage. We barely knew each other. You know, we had a falling out. I was able to sell some stock in a secondary, made my first $1 million and paid off all my debt. You know, quit my job, took a vacation, first vacation in a decade, learned to ski, and it radically changed my life.
Congratulations, by the way.
Hey man, I really hate to do this, but I actually I'm 6 minutes late to an investor call right now. We can pick this up another time. I would love to pick it up and finish because this is amazing. If that's okay with you, we'll find another time and we'll pick up from here. Yeah, that'd be great. That would be great.
Hey, Matt, thank you for sharing. This is amazing.
The Altogether Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto knows that the public markets offer insufficient diversification of retirement accounts. That's why Alto developed a streamlined platform to make it easy and cost-effective for anyone to invest their tax-advantaged retirement savings in alternatives. Assets like real estate, VC, and crypto that are outside of the public markets and available through Alto's 21 platform partners. To learn more, visit altoira.com.